Well, look, it's going to be challenging, Kieran. There's no doubt about that. And my preference is obviously to negotiate with the upper house and the crossbench to have this policy through the parliament. It's a tough policy, I understand that, but it's the right one because on one hand, we've got 400,000 people in the public service who are due a pay rise. On the other hand, we have 500,000 people in New South Wales out of work, and I want to put as many people back in work as quickly as possible. If the upper house are unable to reach a resolution, then obviously we will take this matter to the Industrial Relations Commission.
The shooters and fishers say that they'd support it for those earning over $150,000. My colleague Andrew Clennell reports that Mark Latham also thinks frontline workers should be exempt. Will you potentially make some changes to get that parliamentary support?
Open. Look, my preference has always been, rather than going directly to the Industrial Relations Commission, to pass this regulation through the New South Wales Parliament. And if I can get support from the crossbench in the upper house and we're able to reach agreement, I think that's obviously the best case situation. But otherwise, obviously, we have the Industrial Relations Commission available to us. But look, it's what I'd say to the members of the crossbench and the upper house, and including the Labor Party, I accept this is not an easy decision, but in this pandemic, economically, there is not going to be easy decisions for us to make. We've got to make the tough and right decisions that are fair and in the greater good of the people of our state.
Some of your colleagues apparently questioned why, and this is certainly a point made by others within the parliament, including Labor, asking why frontline workers like nurses and police weren't exempt. Wouldn't it have been more palatable to your colleagues, but also in the community, if you were to make those exemptions?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've obviously thought about this policy long and hard. It didn't get to it easily, and obviously I had significant discussions with the unions as well. And it becomes very difficult in these circumstances to choose between various levels of the public service. They're doing an amazing job, and they'll continue to do so. Whether that's nurses, police officers, train drivers, prison guards, we have many frontline members of the public service. In fact, 90%. 90% of our employees here in New South Wales are frontline public servants, and they're doing a great job. But at the same time, this decision will provide $3 billion, which we can invest in government spending, infrastructure investment, which will put people back into work. Around 20,000 jobs can be created, and we've provided our public servants here in New South Wales over many, many years now, 2.5% pay increases, well above CPI, well above what the private sector have been earning. We've had the most generous wages policy in the nation, and I think that's important because we want to make sure there's as much spending as possible. But they were good times. We're now in pandemic times, and the government's focus needs to shift. We need to invest those funds in government spending initiatives, whether that's health, whether that's infrastructure, to get people back into work as quickly as possible.
The timing, though, hasn't been great because there have been recent pay increases for senior public servants which haven't been reversed.
Yeah, I accept that. And the decision as well I came to was that rather than retrospectively going and changing agreements, for example, our teachers as well have just entered into some contractual arrangements with the state, that I wouldn't be going back, or the government would be going back and changing agreements that have been entered into pre the pandemic. But as those agreements come up into the future, the first 12 months, there'll be no pay increase. So, yes, I understand the context behind that. I see the challenges politically there, but I think it's fair that what we don't do here is go back and change agreements that have already been entered into.
How important has the National Cabinet been and potentially will it be in driving reform in the post-COVID recovery, do you think?
Oh, crucial, Kieran, and I think it's a great, not just opportunity, but an obligation on premiers, treasurers to be working together across political lines to make some, once again, tough decisions for reform, which will take our state forward. And I think economic reform and tax reform, federation reform, it's all difficult. Wages reform is difficult. It can be challenging because it's easy to play politics with it. But you know, during times like this 1 in 100 year situation, You don't get into politics to make easy decisions. You've got to do what's right. And the judgment of the day is less relevant than the judgment in years to come when people look back and say, did they make the right decisions that help drive economic growth so that people remained in work and their kids had the same opportunity that we have. We have an obligation to leave our state and our nation a better place than we found it. That doesn't come with making easy decisions every day. It comes from making the tough decisions that will set our state up and our nation up for success.
Yep, indeed. And one of the points the Prime Minister made this week was on, well, he touched on it briefly, but we're hearing that the government is close to a construction package, a residential construction package. What needs to be in there as far as you see it from your state perspective?
Well, we would welcome any support from the federal government when it comes to construction and infrastructure investment. I mean, that has been crucial here in our state to driving jobs growth and economic growth before the pandemic, and it's going to be just as important to drive us out of it. And particularly what I'd like to see, and what it's the kind of the work that we're doing right now as well, is focusing on shovel-ready projects, or as the Reserve Bank Governor says, screwdriver-ready projects that we can get off the ground as quickly as possible. We've got to work quickly, and at the same time, not let perfection be the enemy of the good here. I want to see projects that will stimulate jobs growth and economic growth, but also have a greater focus on a social good at the end of it. What you don't want to see is when, like the GFC, when we had the building education revolution, which was successful in driving jobs, but not so successful in having a good social outcome at the end of it, with a number of those projects not going well. So things like social and affordable housing, smaller road projects, the ones that might not be great for politicians to cut ribbons on, but more importantly, ones that keep people in work immediately.
If the states are to get rid of inefficient taxes, this is often raised as part of a tax reform agenda, but if you are to get rid of inefficient taxes at the state level, is it only through the GST that we can see greater revenue and therefore compensation, or are there other ways the Commonwealth can compensate states for making such moves?
I think there's other areas like income tax sharing that have been posted in the past as ideas in which we could go down. I think that we need to look at a whole range of areas, put everything on the table. States, I think, can do some reform on their own, but it's much better to do it in connection with the federal government. Obviously, GST is one area, but I think the GST has its own challenges as well when it comes to its distribution, and in many ways it penalises states that reform, whereas it should provide a system which incentivises states. Take stamp duty, for example. If a state was to abolish stamp duty, they'd receive less in GST receipts. So we can't do it alone, and I've had some very constructive discussions with the Federal Treasurer. You have many Labor and Liberal treasurers, state treasurers across the country working together on what some of those reform opportunities could look like. And just next week, we will have presented to the New South Wales Government our review into federal financial relations, which has been chaired by David Thodey, which will touch on a whole range of those areas that have previously been raised in the Shifting the Dial report, the productivity work that the Commonwealth has done, and we will obviously assess those recommendations and continue a very constructive discussion with the Federal Treasurer, because, as I said, I don't think this is an opportunity for reform. We have an obligation to reform for future generations.
Yeah, absolutely. This is shaping as one of the key years, I think, in that sense, and key budget cycles at a federal level that, many of us can remember. Now, Governor Lowe talks about potentially extending the JobKeeper package or something similar beyond September. Do you think that that's going to be important? Is that going to be needed in terms of not basically just pulling the rug from under that support?
Well, it's early days, Kieran. Obviously, we're working, and from my end, I'm very much focused on making sure we have as many people transition from that JobKeeper program in September back into paid work. And that's why some of these difficult decisions around wages, I believe we have to make. We are in a race against time to open up our economy, to be living alongside this virus in a way that is safe, because there's going to be a significant challenge, particularly with the rules around social distancing, that many businesses will struggle to return to the way things were before the pandemic. So if there can be more time provided, that would assist, but from a state's perspective, we're operating within the parameters that we are provided. There's obviously fiscal issues at a federal level as well, and a debt burden that we don't want future generations to pay off. So there's a fine balance here. What we need to be focused on is getting our economy operating as quickly, as openly as possible, as quickly as possible, and get as many people back into work. And that's why we've got to make some tough decisions. And the one we've made, we've announced over the last couple of days, is going to be the first of many difficult decisions over the course of this period of time. But we've got to sit there and not focus on the judgment of the day. We've got to focus on getting as many people in work, particularly, as you say, as that JobKeeper program runs out in September.
And finally, we've reported that you've been one of the key drivers of lifting restrictions in New South Wales and getting the economy back up and running. Could you see crowds at the footy and races within months and, potentially more than 100 back into establishments by the end of the year in New South Wales?
Well, we want to work towards a consistent framework, Kieran, and we've started to get as many businesses up and running as we can. There's a few that we're slowly working through now, and just getting across the gyms, for example, which remain closed. We want to get things open as quickly as possible and prove that once these businesses are open, they can do so safely, and that evidence will then lead to being able to continue to look at other industries like the ones you've raised, to get as many people moving into these cultural events as quickly as possible. We focused on naturally those that are going to help drive economic growth and jobs growth. We've got now from Monday more people being able to access bars, clubs, restaurants. That's going to be a great thing for the hospitality area, and that's obviously going to drive a lot of jobs growth. But then we've got to move to the more cultural areas as well, the footy, the theatre, the opera, and if we can do that in a safe way, that's going to be great for our society.
It sure will. Treasurer Perrottet, we appreciate your time. It's a busy time for you. Thanks so much.